The storm arrived without warning. One moment the mountain road remained quiet beneath gray winter skies, and the next, snow exploded across the valley hard enough, swallowing the world white. Wind screamed through the cliffs surrounding Black Hollow while travelers rushed desperately toward shelter before the roads vanished entirely beneath drifts. Garrick Hale stayed at the forge. The blacksmith rarely feared storms anymore. After 20 years shaping iron beside roaring furnace fires, winter became background noise. Wind outside, hammer inside, life continuing somewhere between them. Sparks burst through the dim workshop, while glowing steel rang beneath heavy strikes late into the evening. Then the mule started screaming outside. Not braying. Panicking. Interesting. Garrick frowned immediately and set the hammer aside. Old Brimstone barely reacted to storms usually, which meant something beyond the forge walls frightened the animal badly. The blacksmith grabbed his lantern and shoved open the workshop door against howling wind. Snow blasted into the forge instantly. And there, half buried beside the roadside ditch, lay a child. God above. Garrick crossed the snowdrift immediately. The figure looked small beneath torn winter cloth soaked through with ice and mud both. Dark green skin showed beneath ripped sleeves while tangled black hair stuck frozen against a pale, frightened face. Orc. Young too. Too young, carrying bruises like those. The girl couldn't have been older than 14. Hey. No response. The blacksmith crouched carefully beside her and immediately felt how cold she truly was. Freezing. Another hour outside, and the storm would have buried her completely. Garrick slid one arm carefully beneath the unconscious girl, lifting her from the snow. The moment he touched her, she woke screaming silently. No sound left her throat. Still, terror exploded across her face while she fought wildly against him despite exhaustion clearly making movement impossible. Easy, Garrick muttered quickly. Wrong word. The girl flinched harder like expecting blows afterward. God. Not fear of strangers. Worse. Recognition. Like men grabbing her usually ended painfully. I'm not hurting you, the blacksmith said carefully while carrying her toward the forge. The girl stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. Then her strength failed completely. By the time Garrick laid her beside the furnace wrapped in thick wool blankets, she had already fallen unconscious again. The forge suddenly felt unbearably quiet around them. Snow hammered the roof overhead, while furnace heat warmed the stone walls softly through flickering orange light. Garrick crouched beside the unconscious girl, studying the bruises more carefully now. Fresh rope marks circled both wrists. Old scars crossed one shoulder, disappearing beneath torn clothing. And every visible injury looked defensive somehow. God above. Someone hurt this child repeatedly. The realization settled cold and heavy inside his chest. Garrick grabbed clean water and medical cloth from the storage shelf before kneeling beside her again. The moment he touched her arm, gently cleaning dried blood, the girl recoiled violently despite barely waking. Please. The word escaped soundlessly from her lips. No voice. Still enough, nearly breaking him. The blacksmith froze completely. Interesting. Not mute maybe. Terrified. The girl's eyes remained closed while silent panic twisted across her face beneath fever and exhaustion both. Then finally she whispered something again. So quietly Garrick barely heard it over the storm. Sorry. God. The words sounded raw from disuse. Like she rarely spoke at all. The blacksmith sat back heavily beside the furnace fire. Whoever this child was, the world clearly taught her apologizing mattered more than surviving. Hours passed slowly afterward. The storm worsened outside while Garrick repaired cuts where he could and warmed broth near the forge fire. The girl woke twice during the night, each time panicking briefly before realizing she still remained inside the workshop instead of wherever she escaped from. She never spoke again. Not one word. Mostly she watched him carefully whenever he moved around the forge. Not curiosity. Survival. Like she measured constantly whether he looked dangerous yet. Around midnight, Garrick finally carried warm broth toward her. The girl immediately tried sitting upright despite obvious pain. You should rest. No answer. Only silence. Then slowly, carefully, she shook her head and reached weakly toward the empty bowls beside the furnace instead. Interesting. The blacksmith frowned slightly. You want to clean them? A small nod. God above. Even half frozen, she still tried earning permission, staying alive nearby. Garrick handed her the broth instead. The girl stared at the bowl silently before looking back toward him with visible confusion. Like kindness without conditions made no sense at all. And sitting there beside the silent orc child while winter storms swallowed Black Hollow beyond the forge walls, Garrick Hale realized one painful truth already. Whatever horrors this girl escaped from, they taught her speaking mattered far less than obedience. The girl didn't speak the next morning, or the morning after that. By the end of the first week, Garrick realized she wasn't simply shy or recovering from fever. The child moved through the forge silently, no matter what happened around her. No questions, no complaints, not even small sounds most people made without noticing. God above, it unsettled him more each day. The storm finally passed by then, leaving Black Hollow buried beneath thick winter snow, while smoke curled lazily from village chimneys beneath pale gray skies. Life returned slowly outside the forge. Inside, silence remained. The girl spent most mornings sitting near the furnace wrapped tightly in one of Garrick's old wool blankets, watching him work beside the anvil. Interesting thing about her, she studied everything. Not curiosity exactly. Awareness, like survival, depended on learning people's moods before they changed dangerously. The blacksmith noticed quickly. Whenever he sighed heavily after difficult ironwork, the girl immediately stiffened. If tools crashed too loudly or customers raised their voices downstairs, she flinched hard enough, nearly dropping whatever she held. And every single time, her eyes went to the exits first. God. One afternoon, Garrick accidentally slammed a metal drawer shut harder than intended while searching for nails. The reaction terrified him. The girl jerked violently beside the furnace like struck already, arms flying instinctively over her head, while panic flooded her face before she even looked toward him. Not surprise. Expectation. The realization hollowed his chest. I'm sorry, Garrick said immediately. Wrong choice. The girl froze. Interesting. Like adults apologizing felt unfamiliar enough, confusing her completely. The blacksmith rubbed tiredly at his jaw before crouching carefully several feet away. I wasn't angry. Silence. The child stared toward the floorboards instead of him, while her breathing slowly steadied again. God above, how many times had someone hurt her after saying they weren't angry first? The forge stayed quiet afterward except for crackling firewood and distant hammer strikes from nearby workshops outside. Then Garrick noticed something else strange. The girl never made noise walking. Not one sound. Even on old wooden floorboards that creaked beneath everyone else. Interesting. Like she learned moving silently mattered somehow. That evening, two miners stopped by the forge arguing loudly about broken equipment while snow melted from muddy boots across the workshop floor. The moment voices rose, the girl vanished. Garrick found her several minutes later hiding behind stacked coal crates upstairs near the storage loft. Curled tightly, hands covering her ears. God. The blacksmith crouched carefully nearby. Hey. The girl flinched instantly hearing his voice despite how softly he spoke. They're gone now. No response. Only silence and trembling shoulders beneath the oversized blanket wrapped around her small frame. Garrick stayed there quietly anyway. Not pushing, just waiting. After several long minutes, the girl finally lowered her hand slightly. The blacksmith noticed tears on her face immediately. Interesting. Not because miners yelled at her directly, because shouting itself terrified her. Someone taught this child loud voices always led somewhere painful. The realization made him quietly furious. Then suddenly the girl reached toward the dusty floorboards beside her and traced something slowly into the cold dust with one finger. Sorry. God above. Garrick stared at the word. Not thank you. Not help. Sorry. The child looked ashamed for existing loudly enough hearing arguments downstairs. The blacksmith felt something heavy twist inside his chest. You didn't do anything wrong. The girl froze, then slowly looked toward him like the sentence physically confused her. Interesting. Like mistakes and punishment felt so connected inside her mind that fear itself counted wrongdoing automatically. Garrick leaned back against the storage wall quietly while snow drifted softly beyond the loft windows outside. What's your name? Silence stretched. Then the girl lowered her eyes again. Not refusal exactly. Fear. God. Maybe names became dangerous too, wherever she came from. The blacksmith sighed softly through his nose before standing carefully. Well, he muttered quietly. Until you decide talking to me isn't terrible, I guess I'll keep guessing. For one brief second, The faintest, almost smile touched the corner of her mouth. Gone immediately afterward. Still enough stopping him cold. Because suddenly Garrick realized something important. The girl wasn't incapable of warmth. She was simply terrified of what happened after people noticed it. Later that night, long after the forge closed and snowstorms softened into quiet winter wind outside, Garrick heard movement downstairs near the furnace. The blacksmith descended carefully, expecting thieves. Instead, he found the girl kneeling beside the fire, arranging iron tools neatly back on his storage hooks after he forgot them earlier. Interesting. Even exhausted children still worked automatically once survival depended on usefulness long enough. Garrick watched silently from the staircase while warm firelight flickered across the frightened little orc girl, cleaning his forge in complete silence because somewhere in her past, someone taught her being helpful mattered more than having a voice. By the second month, the entire village knew about the silent orc girl living in Garrick's forge. And naturally, people talked. Black Hollow wasn't cruel exactly, just small. Interesting thing about small villages. Fear traveled faster than truth ever did. Some villagers avoided the forge completely afterward. Others visited more often than usual, pretending they suddenly needed horseshoes repaired just so they could stare openly at the child beside the furnace. The girl noticed every single look. God above, Garrick hated that most. Not because people whispered, because she reacted like she already expected it. One snowy morning, old Mrs. Tallow stopped beside the forge counter watching the girl stack firewood silently near the wall. She mute. The question landed sharply through the workshop. The girl immediately stiffened, not turning around. Still listening. Garrick kept hammering iron at the anvil without looking up. No idea. Mrs. Tallow frowned. Broken in the head, maybe? The blacksmith's hammer stopped instantly. Silence crashed through the forge. Interesting. Even the fire seemed quieter afterward. The old woman shifted awkwardly beneath Garrick's stare. I only meant. She can't hear you. Mrs. Tallow flushed red immediately before grabbing her repaired kettle and leaving faster than she arrived. Good. Still, damage done. The moment the door shut, Garrick looked toward the girl beside the firewood pile. She kept stacking logs carefully. Too carefully. Like pretending not hearing cruel things somehow made them hurt less. God above. The blacksmith wiped soot from his hands before crossing toward her slowly. You all right? No response. The girl simply nodded once without meeting his eyes. Lie. Interesting thing about frightened children. They lied trying to protect other people from their own pain. That evening the forge stayed unusually quiet afterward while snow drifted softly beyond the windows outside. The girl barely moved from her corner near the furnace. And sometime after sunset, Garrick noticed something making his chest ache unexpectedly. She stopped drawing. At first he barely understood what changed. Then he realized. During the first weeks inside the forge, the girl occasionally traced little pictures absent-mindedly into cold dust or ashes beside the fire. Tiny mountains, flowers, stars, birds. Silent things. Safe things. Now she didn't anymore. Like hearing herself called broken stole even that small comfort away. God above, the realization settled heavily inside him. A few days later things got worse. Two boys around 16 wandered into the forge while Garrick repaired wagon chains near the furnace. Young idiots. The kind growing cruel whenever frightened of looking weak in front of each other. One noticed the girl immediately. There's the mute orc. She froze beside the workbench. The second boy laughed softly. Thinks she understands us? Maybe not. Probably half wild. Interesting. Fear always sounded stupid trying to disguise itself as confidence. Garrick stood slowly from the furnace. The boys noticed immediately. Smart enough realizing danger now. You got something needing repaired, the blacksmith asked flatly. Or you just visiting because boredom made you disrespectful? Silence. One boy shifted awkwardly. We were joking. No, Garrick answered quietly. You were being cruel. The forge went still. Even the girl looked toward him now. The boys mumbled apologies before disappearing back into the snowy evening outside moments later. Only once the door closed did Garrick turn back toward the child. She stared at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Interesting. Like adults defending her still confused her every time. The blacksmith crossed his arms slowly. People say stupid things when they're afraid of what they don't understand. No response. Then after a long pause, the girl carefully pointed toward herself. Question in the gesture. Garrick understood immediately. Not you, he said softly. Them. Silence filled the forge. Warm this time. Then something unexpected happened. The girl stepped cautiously toward the old workbench beside the furnace where coal dust coated the wooden surface lightly from the day's work. Very slowly, like every movement required courage. She wrote something with one trembling finger. Am I broken? God above. The question hollowed the room completely. Garrick stared at the words silently for several seconds while the girl immediately looked ashamed afterward, like regretting asking at all. Not dramatic sadness. Worse, genuine fear the answer might be yes. The blacksmith crouched carefully in front of her. No. The girl looked unconvinced. Garrick glanced toward the old scars visible near her wrists beneath rolled sleeves before speaking quieter. You're hurt. Silence. Big difference. The child stared at him like trying desperately understanding those words. Because somewhere before Black Hollow, people probably treated pain and worthlessness like the same thing entirely. God above. Later that night, long after the forge closed and winter winds softened outside, Garrick found something resting carefully beside his workbench. A small charcoal drawing. Crooked. Simple. It showed the forge fire. And beside it, a very badly drawn blacksmith holding a hammer twice too large. For the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, the silent little orc girl left him something without being asked. And holding the tiny smudged drawing carefully beside the warm furnace light, Garrick Hale realized one heartbreaking truth completely. The child wasn't broken at all. She was simply waiting for the world, proving it wouldn't punish her for existing. The girl finally gave him her name on the coldest night of winter. Snow buried Black Hollow beneath thick white silence, while icy wind rattled the forge windows hard enough, making old wooden beams groan overhead. Most villagers stayed indoors after sunset during storms this bad. Garrick preferred it that way. Fewer customers meant quieter evenings. And quiet evenings seemed easier for the girl too. Over the past few weeks, small changes slowly settled into life inside the forge. She no longer flinched every time Garrick walked behind her unexpectedly. Sometimes she sat closer to the furnace instead of hiding near the back storage wall, constantly preparing escape routes. Interesting thing about healing. It often looked tiny before it looked miraculous. Tonight the girl worked beside the forge table, sorting iron nails into wooden trays, while Garrick repaired cracked horseshoes near the furnace. No words passed between them. Still, the silence no longer felt frightened. Then suddenly the blacksmith noticed something strange. The girl kept staring toward the front door. Again and again, like waiting for someone. God above. Garrick set the hammer down slowly. You expecting trouble? The girl froze instantly. Interesting. Not because he sounded angry. Because questions about the outside world frightened her automatically. The child lowered her eyes toward the nails instead. No answer. Lie. The blacksmith leaned against the workbench quietly, while furnace light flickered warm gold across stone walls around them. You know, he muttered gently. Most people who stay terrified of doors usually have reasons. Silence stretched heavily. Then the girl's hands began trembling slightly above the nail trays. God. Wrong direction. Garrick immediately softened his voice further. Hey, you don't have telling me anything. The child nodded once. Still shaking. Interesting thing about frightened people. Even kindness sometimes scared them worse because it lowered defenses they needed surviving. The blacksmith sighed softly before reaching toward the nearby kettle hanging above the furnace fire. Tea. The girl blinked once, then cautiously nodded again. Progress. Small progress. While Garrick poured steaming tea into old clay cups, the storm outside worsened hard enough, snow striking the windows sideways now. The blacksmith handed one cup carefully toward her. The girl accepted it using both hands immediately. Like warm things still felt precious enough, requiring protection. Then unexpectedly, Garrick asked, You ever gonna tell me your name? The question slipped out softer than intended. The girl froze. Not refusal. Fear. God above. The blacksmith regretted asking immediately. It's all right, he said quickly. You don't have to. The child suddenly set the teacup down. Then very slowly, carefully, she crossed toward the furnace. Interesting. Garrick watched silently while the girl knelt beside the ash tray beneath the fire pit. For several long seconds, she simply stared at the dark gray ashes there while winter wind screamed outside the forge walls. Then finally, with one trembling finger, she wrote something. Lyra. The blacksmith stopped breathing briefly. God above. Not because the name surprised him, because she trusted him enough sharing it at all. The girl immediately looked terrified afterward, like the simple act exposing her name aloud somehow placed her in danger now. Interesting. Maybe names meant ownership somewhere she came from. Maybe people used them hurting her. Garrick crouched carefully beside the furnace without disturbing the ashes. Lyra, he repeated gently. The girl flinched. Not hard. Still enough noticing. God. Nobody said her name kindly in a long time. The realization hollowed his chest unexpectedly. Pretty name, the blacksmith murmured. Silence. Then something extraordinary happened. For one brief second, Lyra smiled. Tiny thing. Fragile thing. Still enough making the forge feel warmer somehow. Gone quickly afterward once she realized Garrick noticed. But real. God above. The blacksmith leaned back against the stone wall beside the furnace while the girl stared anxiously toward the ashes again. Interesting. Like part of her expected punishment now for speaking through written words instead of staying invisible. You know, Garrick said softly, most people introduce themselves with less dramatic weather involved. That startled the faintest breath of laughter from her. Silent laugh. Still laughter. Progress. Outside, snowstorms buried Black Hollow deeper beneath winter darkness, while warm forge fire crackled softly around them. Inside, Lyra traced her own name carefully through the ashes once more, like proving it still belonged to her. Then suddenly Garrick noticed something else. Her handwriting. Neat. Precise. Educated. Interesting. The blacksmith studied the letters again before asking carefully. Who taught you writing? Instantly, the warmth vanished. Lyra's shoulders tightened hard enough, visibly hurting, while fear flooded her expression before she quickly smeared the name away through the ashes with one frantic motion. Gone. God above. The reaction stunned him silent. Not discomfort. Panic. Like writing itself connected directly to terrible memories. The girl backed away from the furnace immediately afterward, wrapping both arms tightly around herself while refusing looking toward him now. Garrick cursed himself internally. Too far. Too fast. The blacksmith raised both hands slightly. Hey, you didn't do anything wrong. Silence. Then finally, very quietly, Lyra looked toward the erased ashes beneath the furnace. And for the first time since arriving at the forge 6 weeks earlier, she spoke aloud. One tiny whisper, raw from disuse. Sorry. God above. The single word shattered something inside him completely. Because her voice sounded young. Not broken. Not monstrous. Just terrified. And staring at the frightened little orc girl apologizing for something as simple as having a name. Garrick Hale realized one painful truth fully. Someone taught Lyra that speaking itself could become dangerous. Lyra became sick 3 days later. At first, Garrick thought it was only exhaustion again. Winter storms still buried Black Hollow beneath freezing winds, and the girl worked too hard despite barely eating enough for someone her age. Interesting thing about her, she never rested unless forced. If Garrick repaired horseshoes late into the night, Lyra stayed awake organizing tools beside the furnace. If he carried coal sacks alone, she silently tried lifting ones twice too heavy for her small frame. Like usefulness mattered more than health. God above, by the third morning, fever burned visibly across her face. The blacksmith found her collapsed asleep beside the workbench before sunrise, curled tightly beneath one of the wool blankets near the dying furnace fire. Lyra. The girl woke instantly. Panic first. Always panic first. Then dizziness hit her hard enough, nearly falling when she tried standing immediately. Wonderful. Garrick caught her before she hit the stone floor. The moment he touched her, Lyra flinched violently despite barely staying conscious. Not because he hurt her, because hands grabbing suddenly still terrified her. God, you're sick, Garrick muttered. The girl shook her head weakly. Lie. Fever practically radiated from her skin. The blacksmith guided her carefully toward the small cot upstairs near the storage loft, while she kept trying silently, pushing herself upright again. Interesting. Like resting itself felt dangerous somehow. You're staying in bed. Lyra looked horrified by the suggestion. God above. Most children would celebrate avoiding work. This child looked frightened. The realization settled coldly inside Garrick's chest while he fetched water and clean cloth from downstairs. By afternoon, the fever worsened. Lyra drifted in and out of restless sleep, muttering fragmented half-words Garrick barely understood while snowstorms rattled the forge windows outside. No, please. Didn't mean. Apologies. Even unconscious, she apologized. Jesus. The blacksmith sat beside the cot, changing cool cloths against her forehead while anger simmered steadily beneath his ribs toward whoever taught a child fear this deeply. Then Lyra woke suddenly, gasping. Panic flooded her face instantly, while trembling hands clawed desperately at the thick winter shirt she wore beneath the blankets. Easy, Garrick said quickly. Wrong word again. The girl recoiled hard enough, hitting the wall behind the cot while breathing unevenly. Interesting thing about trauma. Kind voices sometimes reached people slower than terror did. You're safe. The blacksmith tried again, softer. Lyra stared at him silently through fever-blurred eyes. Then slowly, hesitantly, she pointed toward her throat. Garrick frowned slightly. What hurts? The girl swallowed painfully before tugging weakly at the collar of her shirt. Understanding hit him immediately. The fabric rubbed something raw underneath. All right, Garrick muttered gently. Hold still. Very carefully, the blacksmith loosened the heavy collar enough, seeing beneath it. Then felt physically sick. Bruises wrapped around Lyra's throat. Old bruises. Layered. Some faded yellow with age, while others remained dark enough, healing still unfinished beneath her skin. Thin scars crossed beneath her jawline too, not accidental marks. Finger-shaped. God above. Someone strangled this child repeatedly. The realization hollowed the room completely. Garrick froze, staring at the damage hidden beneath her clothing, while cold fury settled deeper and deeper inside his chest. Lyra noticed his expression immediately. Fear flooded her face. Not because she expected sympathy, because she expected disgust. The blacksmith forced his voice steady. Who did this to you? Wrong question. Instantly the girl curled inward protectively, pulling the shirt collar closed again with shaking hands. God. Not refusal. Survival. Like answering honestly once carried consequences too terrible risking again. Garrick looked away briefly, fighting the urge, smashing something with a hammer downstairs. The bruises explained everything suddenly. The silence. The flinching at raised voices. The terror whenever she spoke accidentally. Someone punished this child for making noise. Jesus Christ. Lyra watched him carefully from the cot, while fever and fear mixed painfully behind exhausted eyes. Then slowly, almost too quietly, hearing it, she whispered. Too loud. The words barely reached him. Still enough, breaking something inside his chest permanently. Garrick stared at her in stunned silence. Too loud. Not rebellious. Not cruel. Not disobedient. A child punished simply for speaking louder than someone allowed. God above. The blacksmith sat heavily beside the cot, while snow hammered against the forge roof outside. Lyra. The girl immediately flinched, hearing her name spoken. Interesting. Not because he sounded angry. Because people usually used her name before hurting her. Garrick realized that with sudden, horrible clarity. The blacksmith leaned forward, resting his forearms against his knees while carefully keeping his voice soft enough, not frightening her further. Listen to me. Lyra stared toward the blankets instead. You never deserved that. Silence filled the little loft. Heavy. Painful. Then slowly the girl looked toward him again. And God. The confusion in her eyes nearly shattered him completely. Like the possibility those punishments were wrong had genuinely never occurred to her before. Outside, winter buried black hollow deeper beneath snow and darkness, while warm forge fire crackled softly below the loft stairs. Inside, Garrick sat beside the frightened little orc girl, carrying bruises around her throat because somewhere in her past, people taught her voices existed only for obeying, apologizing, or screaming. Winter began loosening its grip on Black Hollow slowly. Snow still covered the rooftops and mountain roads surrounding the village, but warmer winds finally drifted through the valley, carrying the smell of wet pine and thawing earth instead of endless ice. And somehow, the forge felt different too. Lighter. Interesting thing about healing. Sometimes you noticed it first in ordinary moments. Lyra no longer slept curled tightly beside doors every night, preparing escape routes before bed. She stopped hiding upstairs whenever customers entered the workshop. Some mornings Garrick even caught her humming softly beneath her breath while organizing iron nails beside the furnace. Tiny sound. Still enough, stopping him cold every time. God above. The girl probably didn't even realize she did it. One afternoon, Garrick returned from delivering repaired tools to the mill only to find the forge strangely quiet downstairs. Too quiet. Interesting. The blacksmith stepped carefully through the workshop, expecting disaster. Instead, he found Lyra kneeling beside the furnace, completely focused on something hidden behind the workbench. "What are you doing?" The girl startled hard enough, nearly dropping the charcoal stick in her hands. Then immediately looked guilty. God, like being caught harmlessly existing still felt dangerous. Garrett crossed toward her slowly and stopped. Drawings covered the stone floor beside the furnace. Small charcoal sketches everywhere. Birds, mountains, tiny houses beneath snowy trees. One terrible drawing of Garrick himself holding a hammer larger than his entire body. God above. The blacksmith barked out a surprised laugh before he could stop himself. Lyra froze instantly. Fear flashed across her face. Interesting. Not because he sounded angry, because laughter itself probably used mocking tones too often around her before. Garrick quickly crouched beside the drawings. "Wait. No. These are incredible." The girl blinked once, clearly unconvinced. The blacksmith pointed toward the ridiculous charcoal version of himself. "Especially this handsome one." Silence. Then suddenly, for the first time since arriving at the forge, Lyra laughed aloud. Small sound, breathy, still enough feeling miraculous. God above. Both of them froze afterward. The girl looked stunned by her own voice, like she forgot laughter belonged to her too. Then slowly, carefully, a real smile spread across her face. Not tiny this time. Not hidden. Warm. Young. Human. The sight nearly broke Garrick's heart completely, because suddenly he could see the child buried beneath all the fear at last. Interesting thing about frightened people. Joy looked almost painful on them at first, like muscles forgotten too long struggled remembering happiness again. From that day onward, little changes multiplied quietly through the forge. Lyra began leaving tiny charcoal sketches beside Garrick's tools every morning. She learned helping shape horseshoes beside the anvil while standing on overturned crates, reaching high enough work comfortably. And slowly, very slowly, she stopped apologizing every 5 minutes. Progress. Beautiful progress. One evening while rain tapped softly against the forge windows, Garrick accidentally burned dinner badly. Enough smoke filled half the workshop. Lyra stared at the blackened stew pot silently for several seconds, then looked toward him and smiled. Actually smiled. The blacksmith pointed accusingly. "You're enjoying this." The girl quickly hid the grin behind one sleeve. Too late. Caught. God above. That earned another soft laugh from her. Warm sound filling the forge easier than silence ever did before. Later that night, Garrick noticed something else changing. Lyra finally touched things without asking permission first. Not stealing. Living. She borrowed blankets instead of freezing, quietly waiting, offered warmth. She sat wherever comfortable instead of hovering near exits constantly. Sometimes Garrick even found her asleep beside the furnace with books open across her lap and charcoal stains covering both hands. Like the forge slowly became home before either of them fully realized it. Then one quiet morning, while Garrick repaired wagon chains near the anvil, Lyra approached carrying a cracked iron mug needing mending. The blacksmith glanced up. "Morning." The girl hesitated briefly, still nervous sometimes, still healing. Then softly, rough voice barely used, yet growing stronger each week, she answered, "Morning." God above. The single word nearly shattered him. Not because it sounded extraordinary, because it sounded ordinary. Safe. Like speaking no longer terrified her every second anymore. Lyra immediately looked uncertain afterward, like waiting punishment simply for talking first. Instead, Garrick smiled gently and returned to the anvil. And for several long moments, the only sounds filling the warm little forge were hammer strikes, crackling firewood, and the quiet breathing of a frightened child slowly learning she was finally allowed taking up space in the world. The hunters arrived just before sunset. Garrick noticed them immediately. 3 mounted riders entered Black Hollow through the northern road, while muddy spring snow melted beneath their horses' hooves and villagers stepped quietly aside, watching them pass. Interesting thing about dangerous men. They carried themselves like the world already belonged to them. These men especially. Dark leather coats. Caravan insignias burned into saddle straps. Crossbows hanging casually beside expensive steel blades polished far too clean for honest work. Not merchants. Hunters. God above. Inside the forge, Lyra saw them 1 second later through the workshop window and went completely pale. The iron nails slipped from her hands, scattering loudly across the floor. The reaction hit Garrick like a punch. Not fear. Recognition. The girl backed away from the window instantly, while panic flooded her face hard enough, draining every trace of warmth from her expression. Lyra. She shook her head rapidly, breathing uneven already. God. The blacksmith crossed toward the workshop entrance, slowly locking the front door before pulling the curtains half closed across the windows. Outside, one of the riders pointed directly toward the forge. Wonderful. Lyra noticed too. I have to go. The words burst from her rough and frightened. Garrick turned sharply toward her. No, they can't find me here. Still believing her existence only brought danger to people kind enough helping her. The girl grabbed frantically for the old winter cloak hanging beside the furnace, while panic shook visibly through both hands now. Interesting thing about trauma. Safety vanished fast once the past came knocking again. Garrick stepped carefully between her and the door. Who are they? Lyra froze. Then quietly, voice cracking badly, she whispered, collectors. Cold dread settled deep inside his chest immediately. Collectors. Not family. Not guardians. Something worse. A hard knock thundered against the forge door before either spoke again. Then another. Heavy enough rattling iron tools hanging from nearby walls. Open up. Lyra physically flinched. Not small fear. Pure terror. God above. The girl looked seconds away, bolting through the back entrance into freezing mountain woods rather than staying near those men another minute. Garrick reached carefully toward her shoulders. Hey. Lyra stared at him with wide panicked eyes. They'll hurt you too. The blacksmith felt anger hardening steadily beneath his ribs now. Interesting. Even terrified, she worried about him first. The knocking came again louder. We know the girl's here. God above. Someone in the village talked. Of course they did. Garrick looked toward the workshop door before grabbing the heavy iron poker resting beside the furnace. Not subtle. Didn't care. Then he faced Lyra again. You stay upstairs. The girl shook her head desperately. Please don't make them angry. Jesus. The sentence hollowed him completely. Like survival taught her, angry men always won eventually. Garrick rested one rough, soot-covered hand gently against her shoulder. I'm already angry. For one brief second, confusion crossed her frightened face. Like adults becoming angry for her instead of at her still made no sense. Then another violent knock shook the forge door. The blacksmith crossed the workshop slowly before unlocking it just enough, stepping into the doorway himself. 3 men waited outside beneath cold evening rain. The oldest smiled thinly once noticing Garrick. We're searching for stolen labor property. There it was. Property. The word made the blacksmith physically sick immediately. The man pulled folded papers from inside his coat, revealing rough charcoal sketches unmistakably resembling Lyra despite crude details. Female orc. Young. Answers to several names. Several names. God above. Like even identity belonged to whoever owned her last. Garrick blocked the doorway fully. No idea what you're talking about. The second rider snorted softly. Witnesses saw her working here. Witnesses. Cowards. The oldest hunter lowered his voice slightly. Look, blacksmith. These situations become expensive once emotions get involved. He tapped the papers casually. The girl escaped contracted labor transportation 6 months ago. Lyra escaped these men. Cold fury spread slowly through Garrick's chest. She's a child. The hunter smiled faintly. She's an investment. Jesus Christ. Behind the forge walls upstairs, absolute silence remained. Too silent. Like Lyra stopped breathing, entirely listening. The hunter reached into his coat, producing a heavy coin pouch. Silver clinked loudly. Good reward for cooperation. Enough money carrying the forge through bad winters. Enough tempting weaker men. Garrick stared at the pouch briefly before looking directly back toward the hunters. Then quietly answered. No. The riders blinked once. Interesting. Apparently refusal surprised them. The second hunter stepped forward slightly. You understand harboring runaway property violates northern trade law? No. Garrick answered flatly. I understand grown men hunting children should embarrass themselves more. Silence crashed through the rainy street. Even nearby villagers watching from windows went still. The oldest hunter's smile vanished immediately afterward. Careful. Why? Garrick tightened his grip around the iron poker slightly. Truth bothers you. Interesting thing about cruel people. They hated being described accurately. The hunters exchanged dark looks. Then upstairs, something crashed loudly. God above. Lyra. Every man outside the forge heard it instantly. The second rider smiled slowly. Sounds like property's nervous. Wrong word. Wrong choice entirely. Because something dangerous settled fully into Garrick Hale's chest then. Choice. The blacksmith stepped forward into the rain. She's not property. The hunter's expression hardened. Move aside. No. Simple word. Still enough changing everything. And standing in the forge doorway while armed men carrying contracts searched for the frightened little orc girl hiding upstairs, Garrick realized one undeniable truth completely. Whatever happened next, he was never handing Lyra back to people who treated children like things to be owned. The hunters left just before midnight. Not because they gave up, because Black Hollow stopped cooperating. Interesting thing about villages. Sometimes all it took was one person refusing cruelty openly before others remembered they could refuse too. Old Marta from the bakery claimed she'd never seen any orc girl at the forge despite bringing Lyra bread twice a week herself. The stable owner swore Garrick lived alone. Even the church keeper deliberately rang the midnight bells early, distracting the hunters long enough several villagers quietly blocked the northern roads with supply wagons. Small acts. Still enough buying time. But after the riders finally disappeared back into the mountain storm, silence settled heavily inside the forge. Not peaceful silence. Fear waiting. Garrick locked the workshop door carefully before turning toward the staircase leading upstairs. Lyra. No answer. God above. The blacksmith climbed slowly toward the storage loft, while furnace light flickered weakly behind him. Then he found her, curled tightly beside the far wall behind old supply crates where shadows hid most of the little upstairs room. Her knees pressed hard against her chest while trembling hands covered both ears despite the hunters already gone. Interesting. Like danger still echoed inside her long after voices disappeared. Hey, Garrick said softly. Lyra flinched instantly. The blacksmith's chest tightened painfully. God. The child looked terrified enough, barely recognizing where she was anymore. I locked the doors, he murmured carefully. Nobody's taking you anywhere. For several long seconds, she simply stared at him through tear-filled eyes. Then suddenly the panic broke open completely. No, no, no. The words burst out rough and broken from disuse while she shook violently against the wall. God above. Garrick crossed the loft, immediately kneeling several feet away without touching her yet. Lyra. They'll come back. Her breathing turned sharp and uneven. They always come back. The raw terror inside her voice hollowed the room. Interesting thing about trauma. People weren't reacting to the present. They were reliving the past. Garrick kept his voice low. Steady. You're safe here. Wrong sentence. Lyra shook her head frantically while tears spilled hard enough, soaking the oversized sleeves wrapped around her hands. No place is safe. Jesus. The certainty inside those words hurt hearing. The blacksmith watched the frightened child trying desperately dragging air into lungs that clearly forgot how calming down worked anymore. Then quietly he asked, "What did they do to you?" Silence crashed through the loft. Lyra froze instantly, not because she didn't understand, because memory itself terrified her. Outside, spring rain tapped softly against the forge roof, while warm furnace light drifted upward through the floorboards beneath them. Finally, very slowly, Lyra lowered her shaking hands from her ears. Then she whispered something so quietly Garrick almost missed it entirely. I had a brother. God. The blacksmith stayed silent, listening, because someone should. He talked too much, Lyra murmured brokenly. Always asking questions. Always making jokes. For one brief second, something warm flickered through her tears. Memory. Love. Gone quickly afterward. The overseers hated noise. Another pause. Especially from children. Cold dread settled deep inside Garrick's chest already. Lyra wrapped both arms tightly around herself while staring toward the dark corner beside the crates instead of him. One day my brother yelled after a guard hit our mother. Her voice cracked badly. He told them stopping people from speaking didn't make them strong. God above. The blacksmith closed his eyes briefly. No. They dragged him away in front of everyone. Silence swallowed the loft entirely. Only rain remained outside. Then finally Lyra whispered the sentence shattering everything. They cut out his tongue. Jesus Christ. Garrick physically stopped breathing for one horrible second. The girl stared blankly toward the floorboards now like the memory hollowed her out from inside, every time touching it again. He couldn't scream afterward, she whispered shakily. Only choke. God above. No child should carry memories like this. None. Lyra wiped angrily at tears spilling down her face before continuing. The overseers made everyone watch. Her breathing trembled unevenly now. They said voices caused trouble. The blacksmith felt fury twisting so hard inside his chest his hands physically shook. Not anger. Something colder. The kind making violence suddenly understandable. My brother died 3 days later. Another pause. Infection. Silence crashed through the little loft again. Heavy. Sacred somehow. Then finally Lyra whispered. I stopped talking after that. God. Not because she couldn't speak. Because somewhere deep inside her frightened child's mind, silence became survival. The blacksmith stared at the terrified little orc girl trembling beside the storage wall, carrying grief far too heavy for someone her age. Then slowly, carefully, he crossed the remaining distance between them. Lyra flinched automatically. Still, after everything, Garrick sat beside her anyway. Not touching, just close enough reminding her she wasn't alone now. The girl cried silently beside him for several long minutes, while rain fell softly beyond the forge walls and warm furnace heat drifted upward through the old wooden floors beneath them. Then eventually, hesitantly, Lyra leaned sideways against his shoulder. Tiny movement, still enough nearly breaking him completely, and holding the frightened child who lost her voice the same night she lost her brother. Garrick Hale realized one heartbreaking truth fully. Lyra wasn't afraid of speaking because she was weak. She was afraid because the world taught her voices could get people killed. The panic attack started after sunset. At first, Garrick didn't realize anything was wrong. The forge stayed unusually quiet that evening while spring rain drifted softly across Black Hollow outside. Lyra spent most of the afternoon helping sort iron shipments near the furnace, and although she looked tired after the hunter's visit, she still smiled faintly once when Garrick nearly dropped an entire bucket of nails across the workshop floor. Small progress. Fragile progress. God above, he should have known fear didn't disappear that easily. The blacksmith returned from locking the stable just after dark and immediately noticed the forge felt wrong somehow. Too silent. Interesting. Not peaceful silence. Empty silence. Lyra. No answer. Cold unease tightened inside his chest instantly. Garrick searched downstairs first. Furnace corner, supply shelves, workbench. Nothing. Then he heard it. Breathing. Sharp. Uneven. Upstairs. The blacksmith climbed toward the storage loft carefully before freezing halfway up the stairs. Lyra crouched tightly beside the far wall near the old coal bins with both hands pressed hard against her ears while her entire body trembled violently. God above. Panic. Not ordinary fear either. The kind dragging people backward into old nightmares completely. Lyra. The girl flinched hard hearing his voice, but didn't look up. Interesting thing about terror. Sometimes people couldn't see the present anymore. Only memory. Garrick moved slowly into the loft, keeping his hands visible and voice soft. Hey, look at me. Nothing. Only sharp, frightened breathing filling the dark little room. Then he noticed the paper, crushed beside her feet. One of the hunters must have slipped it beneath the forge door while Garrick worked outside. A charcoal drawing of Lyra. And beneath it, property recovery pending. Jesus Christ. Cold rage flashed through him instantly. The blacksmith crumpled the paper hard enough, tearing it in half before throwing it into the furnace downstairs. Too late. Damage already done. Lyra rocked slightly against the wall while tears streamed silently down her face. They found me, she whispered brokenly. I knew they would. Garrick crouched several feet away carefully. They're gone. For now. The hopelessness inside those words nearly shattered him. Interesting. She didn't fear dying most. She feared being dragged back alive. The blacksmith watched the terrified little girl struggling breathe properly while old trauma swallowed her whole again. Then softly he asked, "What are you thinking right now?" Lyra stared toward the floorboards. Finally, barely above a whisper, she answered, "That I should have stayed quiet better." God above, the sentence hit like a knife. Not anger toward the hunters, toward herself. Like existing loudly enough being noticed counted personal failure somehow. Garrick felt something crack deep inside his chest then. Because this child survived cruelty so long she blamed herself for people hunting her. No, absolutely not. The blacksmith moved closer before thinking too hard about it. Lyra immediately recoiled. Fear flooded her eyes. Not of him, of what always came after adults got emotional near her. Punishment, abandonment, pain. God. Garrick stopped inches away from her trembling hands. Then very carefully, like handling shattered glass, he reached out and gently held them anyway. Lyra froze completely. The forge loft went silent except for rain tapping softly against the roof overhead. The blacksmith looked directly into her terrified eyes and quietly said 5 simple words. You never have to fear. Everything stopped. Rain, breathing, time itself. Lyra stared at him in complete shock. Not because the words sounded dramatic, because she believed him. God above. Garrick watched the realization hit her slowly. No shouting afterward. No conditions attached. No punishment waiting behind kindness. Just safety. Real safety. The girl's breathing broke completely then. Not panic anymore. Relief. The kind hurting worse once frightened people finally allowed themselves feeling it. Tears spilled harder down her face while Garrick kept holding her shaking hands gently between his own. And suddenly, for the first time in 6 months, Lyra spoke without fear. Not whispers. Not apologies. A real sentence. Raw voice trembling badly from disuse and emotion both. You promise? God above. The words nearly destroyed him. Because she sounded so young. Not broken. Not strange. Just a terrified child desperately needing someone meaning it. Garrick felt tears burning unexpectedly behind his own eyes. Then the blacksmith answered honestly. Yes. Lyra broke apart completely afterward. Silent sobs shook through her small frame while she buried her face against his chest and clung desperately to the front of his work shirt, like letting go might somehow take safety away again. Garrick held her tightly beside the dim forge fire while rain fell softly outside. An old fear slowly cracked apart piece by piece inside the frightened little orc girl who finally spoke again because someone gave her permission, surviving without terror. And sitting there in the quiet loft holding the child who spent 6 months believing silence was the only thing keeping her alive, Garrick Hale realized one extraordinary truth at last. Lyra didn't need saving from her voice. She needed someone teaching her it deserved being heard. Spring arrived in Black Hollow quietly. Snow melted from the mountain roads first, then from the rooftops, then finally from the dark corners behind Garrick's forge where winter always seemed lingering longest. Warm winds drifted through the village carrying the smell of rain, pine wood, and fresh bread instead of endless smoke and frost. And somehow, the forge changed too. Not because the building looked different, because Lyra did. Interesting thing about healing. One day you suddenly realize someone stopped looking afraid every second. It happened slowly at first. Lyra no longer froze whenever customers entered the workshop unexpectedly. She stopped apologizing for dropping tools or speaking too loudly during conversations. Some mornings Garrick even heard her singing softly beside the furnace while sorting iron nails into trays before sunrise. Tiny songs, still enough nearly stopping his heart every time. God above. The first villagers hearing her speak looked shocked. Not cruelly, just surprised. Because for 6 months the little orc girl barely made sound at all. Now she quietly greeted customers entering the forge. Morning. Thank you. Careful, hot iron. Simple words. Ordinary words. Still miraculous somehow. Children adapted fastest. Children usually did. Soon local boys started lingering near the forge asking Lyra, teaching them charcoal drawing, while little girls followed her around the market square fascinated by the tiny animal sketches she carried tucked inside old notebooks. Interesting. Nobody called her broken anymore. Now they called her by name. Progress. Beautiful progress. Not everyone changed completely, of course. A few villagers still whispered when noticing the scars around her throat. Travelers occasionally stared too long at the frightened-looking orc girl working beside the blacksmith, twice her size. But now, Lyra didn't shrink every time, because she finally understood something important. Fear belonged to cruel people, not her. One warm evening near sunset, Garrick returned from delivering repaired farming tools outside the village and stopped quietly in the forge doorway. Lyra sat beside the furnace reading aloud softly from one of the old storybooks Garrick found buried upstairs beneath storage crates. Reading aloud. God above. The sound nearly shattered him. Not because her voice sounded unusual, because it sounded safe. The girl stumbled over longer words occasionally, wrinkling her nose in frustration before trying again harder each time. Interesting thing about confidence. It arrived clumsy before becoming natural. Garrick leaned quietly against the doorway, listening while golden evening light spilled through forge windows around them. Then Lyra noticed him, immediately embarrassed. The book snapped shut against her chest while faint panic flickered automatically across her face out of old habit. Still healing. Still human. The blacksmith smiled gently. You skipped 3 pages. The girl blinked once. You heard that. Whole village probably heard that. Lyra looked horrified for half a second, then realized he teased her, and laughed. Warm sound filling the forge easier than silence ever did before. God above. Garrick honestly thought he'd spend the rest of his life protecting that sound if necessary. The girl climbed down from the furnace chair afterward, carrying the old book carefully beneath one arm. You're late. Interesting. Not accusation. Comfort. Like expecting him returning safely now felt ordinary. Had customers, Garrick answered while setting tool crates beside the workbench. Unlike certain assistants reading during work hours. Lyra grinned slightly. You read too slowly. There it was. Playfulness. The blacksmith shook his head dramatically. Ungrateful child. That earned another laugh. Outside, Black Hollow glowed softly beneath spring sunset, while villagers wandered muddy streets carrying ordinary peaceful lives forward around the little forge at the edge of town. Inside, Lyra suddenly grew quieter. Not frightened. Thoughtful. The girl looked down toward the worn storybook in her hands before speaking softly. I forgot what my voice sounded like. God. The sentence hollowed the warm forge air instantly. Garrick looked toward her carefully. Lyra touched the old scars near her throat absent-mindedly, while firelight flickered softly across green skin, no longer hidden beneath oversized collars and fear. For a while, she whispered, I thought maybe losing it forever would hurt less. Jesus. The blacksmith crossed the workshop slowly before kneeling beside her near the furnace. You didn't lose it. The girl looked uncertain. Garrick rested one rough, soot-covered hand gently over hers. They tried taking it. Another pause. Different thing entirely. Silence settled warmly between them afterward while evening wind drifted softly through the forge windows. Then suddenly Lyra asked, Why did you help me? Interesting question. Not because she doubted him anymore. Because she genuinely wanted understanding now. Garrick thought quietly for a moment before answering honestly. Because no child should look that afraid. Lyra stared at him silently after that. Then very slowly, carefully, she leaned forward and wrapped both arms around him. Not desperate this time. Not frightened. Just love. Simple as breathing. God above. The blacksmith held her tightly beside the warm forge fire while sunset painted golden light across the workshop around them. And sitting there beside the little orc girl who once believed silence was the only thing keeping her alive, Garrick Hale realized one extraordinary truth completely. Lyra's voice was never the fragile thing needing protection. Her heart was. And somehow, despite everything the world did try and break it, it remained kind anyway.